This PowerPoint is on prototyping. So we are finally here on our second last step of our course project. The last step will be your usability testing. The second last step is where we are now, is building a prototype. So before we build a prototype, let's talk about what a prototype is. So what is a prototype? A prototype is a simulation or a sample version of your final product or your final interface, which is to be used for testing prior to launch or prior to another iteration of the prototype. Okay, so the goal of building this prototype is to test the interface or your idea before sinking a lot of time and money into just going ahead and building the final product or interface. Okay, so why do we prototype? Prototyping is essential for resolving usability issues before launch. It can also reveal areas that need improvement. And once a draft of your product idea is in the hands of real users, then you can finally see how they want to use the product. So prototype is sort of like an example of how your real interface would work. So it's something that's usable, but it's not the actual thing, because the actual thing would actually take a lot of time, money, and effort into building. So this is just something that you can test it, you can test people using it, and you can also see where people might have trouble using your idea and things like that. So a prototype is great because you can always go back and adjust your initial guesswork. So when you're building something, you have to do a lot of guessing. A lot of the decisions that you make in your prototype are from your research. Some of the answers you did not get, so you just had to guess. Now you have to go back and test it, and then test if you guessed correctly for some of the decisions that you have to make. Okay, so the prototype is part of a cycle, so it's not the final product. Where we started, was so if we're building the prototype here. Okay, so if we're building the prototype here, it will go into review. So that will be our next step. As I mentioned, we'll be doing our usability testing. So we'll test the prototype after building it. And then we will see some flaws where things don't work out, or we made the wrong guesses or the wrong assumptions, or just bad decisions, and it will go into refinement. So we'll refine, we'll change all the wrong answers, and again, maybe have to guess again, or make other choices again, and it will go to the second iteration of your prototype, and it'll keep going round and round until it gets better and better. Okay, so the good news for you, I guess, is that you don't have to make another version of your prototype. So we are going to end the cycle here for the purposes of our course, but we are going to come up with ideas for refinement. We're going to think about what we need to refine, what we need to change. But don't worry about it yet. This review and refine is in our next assignment. Our current assignment that we're working on is your prototype. So you just have to only worry about prototyping right now. So that's what this PowerPoint is all about. Okay, so prototypes have four main qualities. The first one is representation. It's the actual form of the prototype. So it can be paper or mobile, HTML, desktop. Okay, there is precision. So the precision meaning the fidelity of the prototype, meaning its level of detail, polish, and realism. Some prototypes are pretty basic. It doesn't really look like the real thing, and it just gives you an idea of how to use the real thing. For example, we have a group that's doing the VR interface, right, to try on clothes. So obviously we're not going to actually build the VR thing. So they're going to build a prototype that will allow us to somehow have a similar experience, but it's not going to be the real thing. Okay, so the precision would then be, not very realistic. It won't be a very precise prototype, but it will is still beneficial, it's still useful. Just because it's not realistic or exactly like its final product, it doesn't mean that it's not useful. Okay, so a prototype is just a tool to help you get answers to questions. Okay. Next is interactivity, so the functionality open to the user. So you might build a prototype that's fully functional, only partially functional or view only. Okay, so I had asked groups to, you know, just only create your task flow. So you might be able to, in the real version, you might be able to do many different things, but I wanted, because of the amount of time we have, I just wanted you to be able to create one task flow in your prototype. So as long as you know, the user can go onto your Web Campus site, for example, one of the groups is in Web Campus, as long as they can go there, you know, add courses for the next semester and so on, as long as they can do those steps, then, you know, you will get to understand whether you built your prototype correctly, if the flow makes sense, if the buttons are in the right place, or if you know, if the menu is correct or useful. So you still have a good idea, even though it's not fully functional. So you might not be able to check grades or enter grades, or, you know, email from your Web Campus, things like that. It's not fully functional. It's only partially functional. Okay, but you still get an idea. The user still gets an idea when they test it to see if, you know, if it's easy to use or not user friendly or not. So the next quality is evolution, the life cycle of the prototype. Some prototypes are built quickly, tested, and then thrown away, and then replaced with an improved version. Others are built and then improved upon, and ultimately evolving into the real thing, the final product. Okay, so this is, for example, if you're building like an HTML prototype, you might actually continue building on it and reiterating and changing it until that site actually becomes the one that you end up using. Or if it's, you know, built in PowerPoint, obviously it's just going to be improved upon, and when it comes time to make the real website, then, you know, you go to a different place to do that. All right, so there are, you know, basically two main different types of prototyping. There is just like the pen and paper type, and then there's the digital prototyping. So what we're doing here is the digital prototyping. So that's what we're going to focus our PowerPoint on. Okay, so digital prototypes are the most common form of prototyping, and they're realistic enough to accurately test most of the interface elements, you know, with some limitations. So if it's, you know, if you're building a website and you're creating, you know, a PowerPoint or an XD prototype, then, you know, you use your mouse and your keyboard to get around, and that's quite realistic. However, if you are going to if your final product is going to be a kiosk, obviously it's, you know, not going to be quite so realistic. Anyway, the digital prototypes are, you know, are good because they're realistic to accurately test most interface elements, except for when it comes to maybe tapping or swiping. That might not work on your PowerPoint or so. Anyway, they are much easier to produce than HTML prototypes. Okay, so you can also create them in HTML if you have strong HTML skills. If you think that might actually be a faster way to do it, you are free to do it. Okay. Digital prototypes can be built using apps and software made specifically for prototyping. So you can even make simple digital prototypes using, you know, software like PowerPoint or Keynote. So that is always an option, and most students have that. If you have the Adobe Creative Suite, you can download XD and try using that for your prototype. Quite easy to learn. I can send you a link to a tutorial. Another one you can do is you can create an HTML prototype. So you can go into HTML and actually create the site there. If you have strong HTML skills and strong Dreamweaver skills, you can go in there and create that. Okay.